Week 5 of the fantasy football season. He has quarterback start sit every matchup. This week, first matchup, Thursday Night Football, Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Atlanta Falcons. Baker Mayfield, I would put him in the lineup as an easy start this week. The first 3 out of 4 weeks he's gone out there, put up big performances. We know this Falcon defense is middle of the pack. And when you got wide receivers like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, it's easy to get into production early and often. And this week, where games on Thursday night are usually high scoring, he's a start. Kirk Cousins is a sit for me. I know it's a decent matchup with Tampa Bay coming to town. Secondary banged up Thursday Night Football. But Kirk Cousins, to me, is not 100%. Still trying to get rapport down with his receivers. Drake London, Darnell Mooney, Kyle Pitts at the tight end position. And Bijan Robinson, his numbers haven't been all that great. So this week, Kirk Cousins is a sit again. New York Jets at the Vikings in London early Sunday ball game. Aaron Rodgers is a sit so far. Aaron Rodgers, one great game he's had and 2 mediocre, and 1 poor performance for Aaron Rodgers. So this Jet offense isn't hitting on all cylinders. Last week losing 10-9 versus the Broncos. I know it was rainy conditions and the ball was slick and not much was going on, but already it looks like Rodgers is unhappy and pointing blame on his head coach a little bit in Robert Saleh. So this week versus one of the better defensive units in the league, I think Aaron Rodgers is a sit. Sam Darnold to start for me in this one. Sam Darnold's playing lights out football, leading this Viking team to 4-0. And when you got a number 1 wide receiver like Justin Jefferson and you can move the football around a little bit, I think it's a good opportunity, and that's exactly what's happened with Darnold, where he's a top 5 quarterback in fantasy football right now. So once again, even in a tough matchup versus the team he drafted him in, the New York Jets, you know Darnold's going to want to stick it to them in this one. And he's a quarterback to start. Carolina Panthers at the Bears. Andy Dalton's definitely turned this offense around, and they've been more competitive over the last 2 weeks. But it's still a tough matchup, I believe, with the Bears, where their defense is underrated. They're going out there, and they're carrying this team to victories, while the offense hasn't done much this season. So with all those factors, Andy Dalton, like I said, he's played good the last 2 weeks, but still not a viable fantasy in your basic 10, 12-team leagues. Caleb Williams a sit. It's been a rough first month of the season for the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. This week, I know it's a great matchup on paper for the Chicago Bear team, but Caleb Williams can't get the football down the field. He's taking a lot of hits. Offensive line isn't all that great for this Bear team. So this week, once again, even in a plus matchup, he's a sit. Cleveland Browns at the Commanders. Sean Watson, maybe his best years are behind him with off the field issues the last few seasons and injuries, and he just hasn't been the same quarterback, and he's not getting anything going with his wide receivers. David Njoku possibly could return in this ball game, which could be a plus. I know the Commanders' defense isn't all that great, but Deshaun Watson this week, even in a decent matchup on paper, is a sit. Jaden Daniels already skyrocketing up the ranking board quickly at the quarterback position, and this week not the greatest of matchups versus a tough Cleveland Brown defense led by Myles Garrett and Denzel Ward in the secondary. Still Jaden Daniels with his rushing ability, not turning the football over, and the great poise and athleticism in the pocket. He's pretty much a must-start weekly at the position. Miami Dolphins at the Patriots. This possibly could be the worst game of the week between these two AFC East rivals, and no one has fantasy value at all. Huntley, it was a mess on Monday Night Football versus the Tennessee Titans. And this week versus a decent Patriot defense, I don't see Huntley doing much. Even though it's the best option Miami had, he's better than Tim Boyle and Skylar Thompson to throw out there as Huntley. So maybe he could surprise a little bit, but I would not have any confidence this week. Jacoby Brissett is sit as well. It's just a matter of time before Drake May is going to be in the starting lineup. I know this Dolphin defense isn't all that great, but Brissett really hasn't put up numbers all season. And like I said, he's just a veteran quarterback in there until Drake May is ready to go. Colts at the Jacksonville Jaguars. If Anthony Richardson does play in this game, he's a starter. I know Richardson, he left last week with a hip injury, but he got off to a nice start in that ball game before he had to exit and Joe Flacco entered. So Anthony Richardson, a good matchup at a weak Jacksonville Jaguar defense that just got shredded by C.J. Stroud and that Texan offense. And Anthony Richardson, he just got to be a little bit weary of when he's got to run and pick his spots wisely, because last season we saw he got injured running, and then last week got injured as well with the hip and took a big shot to the ribs. But if he's in this ball game, he's a start. Joe Flacco, if he's starting, a borderline option. Flacco last season, no doubt about it, when he signed with the Browns, led them to the playoffs. They moved the football down the field. And we saw last week as well, coming into that ball game versus a good Steeler defense. Flacco got the football down the field. He got the ball to his playmaker, Michael Pittman, and he went out there and make plays. So if he's in the lineup and Richardson is out, he's a borderline option. Trevor Lawrence is sit for me in this ball game. Lawrence really hasn't done much this season. I know last week Thomas and Christian Kirk got involved, and they were leading the majority of that game, but blew it in the final minute. Jacksonville's defense blew it, and they lost at the Texans. Buffalo Bills at the Houston Texans. I know Josh Allen, 2 great games, 2 bad games to start the season for Allen. But after a bad game, he usually bounces back with a vengeance. And this week in a matchup where the secondary is beatable of the Houston Texans, I think Josh Allen rolls after getting blown out on Sunday night versus Baltimore. And he was the number 1 quarterback off the board. He's a must-start. C.J. Stroud, a must-start quarterback as well. I know his numbers have been up and down in the early going. Last week went out there over 300 yards. And when you got wideouts like Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs, you're going to be matchup proof most weeks. And this week versus the Buffalo defense, now with Von Miller suspended, I think Stroud goes out there and has another great game. Baltimore Ravens, Cincinnati Bengals, these 2 quarterbacks, the way this quarterback position's been in the early going this season, they're locked in as great options. Lamar Jackson, I think, is the best quarterback in fantasy football so far in the first month of the season. He's been very consistent. He's going to get the rushing yards. And this week in a big division matchup at a team, obviously he's very familiar with in the Bengals. He goes out there once again, has a big game. Joe Burrow, last few weeks, he's really putting up yards, putting up fantasy points. T. Higgins, he's been back the last 2 weeks, and that's where the numbers really went up for Joe Burrow. So the last couple weeks, big ball games versus Washington in week 3, over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns. Last week, another big game for him at the Carolina Panthers. And this week in a ball game in a potential shootout, Burrow's a start. Vegas Raiders at the Denver Broncos. Gardner Minshew was sitting this one for me. Gardner Minshew, he's just been inconsistent so far this season. And now Davante Adams, he requested a trade, and it wouldn't be surprising to me if he's traded sooner than later, or they're just going to keep him off the field saying he still has the hamstring injury before they deal him off as this Vegas Raider team. So now with his number 1 weapon out until he gets traded most likely, and still dealing with an injury and a tough matchup at the Broncos, one of the better defenses in the early going, he's a sit. Bo Nix is a sit for me as well. I know Nix, he's looked better over the last couple weeks, even though last week that game tape you throw out a little, it was a rainy ball game, slippery, tough to grip the football, and he was versing a good defense in the New York Jets. But even this week, I know this bye start and the Raiders defense isn't great, but still Bo Nix is sit. Arizona Cardinals at the Niners, both these quarterbacks have locked in his starts. Kyler Murray so far hasn't been a great season. 2 good games, 2 bad games for the most part. But this quarterback position, like I mentioned, is so weak this season that you just got to roll with the guys you took in the fantasy draft, anywhere from that 3rd to 5th round range quarterbacks, and Kyler Murray was one of them. So this week in a matchup where they're most likely going to be trailing, and he's going to have to throw the football and hopefully get Trey McBride back in the lineup off the concussion. Kyler Murray, I still will give a start. Brock Purdy a start. Last couple weeks, he settled in. And now Deebo Samuel, George Kittle returned to the lineup last week and paid big dividends for this Niner team. And this week, Brock Purdy, an easy start with all those weapons and a good matchup. New York Giants at the Seattle Seahawks. Daniel Jones, he just can't find the end zone. I know the completion percentage has been great for Daniel Jones, no doubt about it, this season. He's got 2 good receivers, especially Malik Neighbors, already a superstar. He looks in the first 4 weeks of the season. And Wan'Dale Robinson, a nice underneath wideout who'll go out there and make plays. And Singletary, pretty decent in the backfield. But still, Daniel Jones, he's not a quarterback I could trust. Going to the 12th man in Seattle, easy sit. Geno Smith, great weapons. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet out of the backfield. It's a lot of good weapons on the Seattle offense. New system with a whole new coaching staff under McDonald this year. And this week in a good matchup versus a Giants secondary that's weak and leaky in most parts. He's a start. Geno Smith, Green Bay Packers at the Rams. Jordan Love, he's pretty much a quarterback I have locked in weekly. Last week, I know he threw 3 interceptions, but also almost threw this Green Bay Packer team back into the ball game. Dotavian Wicks had a breakout game. Jaden Reed, one of the more exciting wide receivers in the league. Tucker Kraft, a nice game. So with all those weapons and Love spreading the football out, and he's got rushing upside as well, he's an easy start this week. At a banged-up Rams secondary, Matthew Stafford is sit. Without Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, it's very tough for Matthew Stafford. I know he's had Kyren Williams playing great football, no doubt about it, for this Ram team. But Matthew Stafford, he's a quarterback that it's going to be tough for him to get points. And this Green Bay Packer team leads the league in turnovers course. So this week with a tough matchup and once again without his 2 top receivers, he's a sit. Dallas Cowboys, Pittsburgh Steelers, I think this is going to be a grinded out game between these two teams. Dak Prescott, his numbers haven't been all that great besides that big Week 3 performance in almost a comeback victory at versus the Baltimore Ravens. This week, a pretty decent game, 20 fantasy points for Dak. He had 2 touchdowns, over 200 yards, but this week a tough matchup at the Steelers. I know the Steelers gave up a lot of points in that ball game at the Colts, 27 points, but Dak Prescott, like I said, the numbers haven't been great so far this season, mediocre to poor. And with the tough matchup and the Cowboy O-line not that great this season and non-existent running game for the most part, I think is a tough spot on Sunday nights, a borderline option at best. Justin Fields, a start for me in this ball game. They're banged up right now. Is a Dallas Cowboy defense. Micah Parsons most likely out in this ball game with the leg injury. DeMarcus Lawrence already placed on IR. He's out in this one. In the secondary, Carson, we'll see if he returns. So with all those factors and Justin Fields playing good football and having good confidence, and last week was a breakout game for him. I like him as a start in the final game Monday night, New Orleans Saints at the Chiefs. Derek Carr, first 2 weeks of the season, one of the better quarterbacks, and now the last 2 weeks coming down to earth are the numbers versus the Philadelphia Eagles. And then last week at the Falcons, he didn't do anything pretty much, was Derek Carr. I know he's got good weapons, Chris Olave, Alvin Kamara, Rashid Shaheed's definitely emerged this season, but in a tough matchup versus one of the better defenses in the league, he's an easy sit. Patrick Mahomes, he's a start. And the way the quarterback position is, you just got to roll out with these top picks. Mahomes, Hurts, Allen, they've all had bad games so far this season, but they're guys that could pop off and put up points anytime. We know Rashee Rice with the knee injury, he's out, obviously. We know Isaiah Pacheco, he's been out multiple weeks already, and we don't know when he's coming back. And Hollywood Brown, he's out for the season as well with the shoulder injury. So Mahomes with Xavier Worthy, Watson, Juju Smith-Schuster, Sky Moore, he's going to be playing with. And even with those guys in a tougher matchup, I think Mahomes is still startable. So that's quarterback start sits every matchup for week 5 of the fantasy football season.